and I hope that'll be useful to you. I'm Meg Little, and I'll be talking about research in general. I'd like to start by thanking CNN and the Speakers Bureau for this opportunity and their just wonderful support through this whole process. And thank you for joining us today. I'd like to take just a moment to kind of gather us together here for the next 20 minutes. And let's take a minute to just take a few deep breaths together. So if you'll just breathe in with me, a nice big belly filling inhale and exhale, and close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. And then another breath together. Maybe wiggle yourself into a comfortable position as we've all been sitting or standing for just a bit. And if you would imagine a bubble of consciousness surrounding all of us for this gathering, and leave all of the distractions outside that bubble. Let's take one more deep breath together and open your eyes if you're ready. And let's dive into talking a bit about research. So, a little bit about me. I can't believe that I've been a nurse for 2/3 of my life, but it's been a really good run. I've accomplished a lifelong dream of getting a doctorate in 2013, and I now teach and do research at the University of Minnesota. My work is centered around social and health justice, and I'm just making a turn into cannabis research. I'm a coach, and I also love nature and creativity, learning, and being a grandmother. And that's my little grandson there with me in that slide. So my roadmap for today is to talk about why research. I'm also going to ask you for some of your thoughts about research. I'm going to talk a little about why I think research is for everyone, and then 4 ways that you can get involved in research. And then I'm going to have you make a call to daydream about potential research projects for you. So you may be wondering, why talk about research? Well, here are some reasons. So the first one is that research gives us the opportunity to learn and solve problems, including improving the quality of our practice. Next, it builds on a foundation that enables us to practice evidence-based nursing in a really intentional and conscious way. Done well, it ensures that many different voices and perspectives are included. As much as people try to be unbiased in research, it's inevitable. We're human. It just seeps in there. So let's not forget that cannabis research has been hampered by the lack of funding compared to other areas of healthcare. And also because of the bias that comes from government agencies who back up that funding. The medical system that we have in place and the public also has some stigma and bias about cannabis, which affects cannabis research. Lastly, we just can't practice without the evidence that research provides for us. So I'd like you to just take a minute and let that soak in. No research, no practice. So I'd like to get your thoughts on some of these things. And you can comment in the chat if you'd like. So when you hear the word research, do words like boring and intimidating come to mind? Do visions of tedious research projects that you might have had as school assignments come to mind? Or are you intrigued by research and the possibilities that it brings, but you can't imagine where you get started or where you might get the resources? Well, not seeing any responses in the chat. All of the above, says Marilyn. Thank you. What I'd like to tell you is that I can relate. I've been there. I've done that. I got the t-shirt. While I was a very inquisitive kid, my early schooling didn't support the idea that I could be a researcher. Like many of you, Many of you may also have experienced this. I became convinced that research was for very small number of people who had special training. I thought research followed rules that I really just couldn't understand. And I thought it required funding that was terribly difficult to get. And I was convinced by my environment that I really didn't belong in research. In all honesty, my imposter syndrome was really on board with all of this assessment that I had done. It wasn't until decades later that I realized that we are all natural researchers. And what do I mean by that? Well, curiosity drives research, and children are the most curious people I know. Take, for example, learning to ride a bike. For me, watching my older cousins zip around on their bikes sparked my curiosity about doing the same. I wondered, how can I ride a bike? I gathered a lot of information. I watched them intently. I even experimented with their bikes that were way too big for me. Eventually, I asked for help, and after lots of trial and error, I was riding a bike. That was a research project. I formulated a question, I tested out some solutions, I gathered data, analyzed it, and reached a conclusion. I believe that we all have an instinctual understanding of research as children, and in a perfect world, that would be nurtured and developed instead of drummed out of us in school and in other ways. For example, I really marvel at my grandson, who's 8 years old, and his research adventures. He gets consumed by the Minnesota Vikings and all the player stats, by dinosaurs and ping pong and Pokemon, and I hope he never loses that. So I also want to say that not all of my research adventures were advisable. When I was 5, I was fascinated by the beaters on my mother's mixer. And when they were stationary, I could see all those little individual spokes on the metal beaters. But when the beaters were spinning, they seemed to disappear like little clouds. And so, what's a 5-year-old to do? Well, of course, I stuck my tiny little fingers into that space where the spokes were supposed to be. My hand got sucked in and stuck in between the beaters. There was lots of shouting and batter flying everywhere, followed by frantic calls to the pediatrician and various relatives. But again, there was a question. I gathered information, I analyzed it, and I reached a conclusion not to try that again. I think this quote by Zora Neale Hurston really sums it up for me. Research is a formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with a purpose. So, next, let's talk about ways that you can get involved with research. First, you can support research. When you get that email or asking you to participate in a survey or to be interviewed, you could jump at that chance. Your experience and your viewpoints are really important and can truly make a difference in finding answers to challenging questions around cannabis nursing. For example, stay tuned. I have a research project that is in the works, and I will need cannabis nurse volunteers for it. So if you get an email from me, I would really appreciate you getting involved in that way. Another way that you can get involved is as a citizen researcher. And this means collecting or analyzing data for other researchers. One example is the Cannabis Research Initiative for Citizen Scientists, which is at the University of Colorado Boulder. They look for citizen scientists to collect data for them. Unrelated to cannabis, there are a couple of examples in my own world here in Minnesota. We have the Worm Watch, which is a science project where community members, including kids, go out and find and document exotic earthworms, which is a problem in our area. And they give all of that data to a biologist at my university who uses it to solve problems about invasive species. This morning, I actually heard on the radio that as citizen scientists are being recruited to take water samples all around our area to research the health and well-being of Lake Superior watershed. Okay, the next thing you can do is if you have an idea for a research project, you can collaborate with someone you trust who has the know-how and the resources. One caveat here that I just want to make sure everybody takes into consideration is that trust is really important when sharing your ideas. You might not know this, but ideas are currency in professions like mine and academia. And unfortunately, some disreputable people will steal your ideas, scoop them, and use them as their own. So approach those relationships with caution and make sure that they're trusted people to collaborate. The next kind is to think about community-based research. So if your community has a need or a problem, you can consider this type. In this model, the community identifies a problem and collaborates with an academic institution, and which has considerable resources in terms of money and person power. And they are accountable to the community through mechanisms like community advisory boards. So you don't run into that trust problem. It's kind of built into the research project. The last thing you can do is strike out on your own. And research has recipes and I think that's really important. It gets overly complicated and people shy away from it because they don't think that they understand it. But think recipes. There's a format for doing this, and they're not difficult to follow. One example is action research. So action research comes out of education, but it's widely used in nursing. It's a cyclical process that balances problem-solving actions with data-driven analysis. And it supports our understanding of those underlying causes, not just the kind of superficial signs and symptoms that we might be noticing. And it enables us to make predictions about the future and to navigate change well. Okay, so let me walk you through this process. So when you think about action research, it has 3 and sometimes 4 phases to it. So planning, act and observe, and the results and reflection. And on the right-hand side, I'd like you to relate this to my bicycle example so that it'll make a little bit more sense. So addressing the question, what's the problem, and gathering information. You might remember back to my bicycle example that I really wanted to ride a bike. I just didn't know how at the moment. And then envisioning a future success. I could see myself riding that bike. I figured if my cousins could do it, I knew I could do it too. And the next part was to develop a research plan. And I had to figure out how I was going to go about making this work. And the next set, act and observe, I collected data. How did my cousins get to riding bikes? Who could help me? And then the next part, I analyzed the data and formed conclusions. So getting a bike with training wheels was a really viable option at the outset. And then thinking about results and reflections, I developed an action plan for change. For me, it was trial and error and lots of scraped knees. And then reporting the results. Everyone in my world got to know about how my biking adventures were going. And then lastly, reflecting and beginning again. I went back through this process time and again. I lost the training wheels. I learned tricks. I got a bike with gears and handbrakes. I think you get the idea. So let's apply this to cannabis nursing. So my example here is about a nurse who's a dispensary medical director. So thinking about the planning stage, you notice that many people coming into your dispensary are looking for help with sleep. And you're not sure if your bud tenders or the clients have enough information about this area. So you're imagining a future where bud tenders and clients have the information that they need to make informed decisions about their own care. And next, you develop a research plan. So you might think about things like focus groups where you get a bunch of people together and you ask them questions and they all answer those questions and you get a lot of great data. And you might think about surveys, sending out a survey to your client base, surveying your bud tenders. You might even reach out and ask other dispensaries how they're handling this. And then the next part, act and observe, you actually go out and do the focus groups and the surveys and figure out what people's current knowledge and practices are. And then you analyze those transcripts and survey results and form a conclusion about what you're being told from all of that information and data you've collected. The last part is the results and reflections. So you might find from your conclusion that developing educational materials or programs for both the bud tenders and the clients might be helpful in increasing their knowledge and their ability to, on the bud tender side, to be able to serve clients, and on the client side, to be informed consumers. You could even put together a course, an online course for your website that would educate people who might be thinking about coming to your dispensary for help. And then you want to reflect on how these actions are working. So if you do the education or provide the materials, what's the feedback that you're getting about that? Are they working? Are they not working? How could you improve them? And the cycle starts all over again, where you're going back to planning, acting and observing, and then looking at your results and reflecting on them. So here's your call to action, your call to daydream. I would love it if you would close your eyes for just a moment and then just listen to what comes up in terms of things that in your world could use a little bit of research. And we're not censoring in this moment, we're just seeing what comes up, if anything. And if you have your device handy or a pen or pencil and paper, you can jot those down. And you can come back to this place at any point in the future and sit with it and see what comes up for you. But when you do get some ideas, let those ideas germinate, see how they grow, see what all the little tentacles coming off them might imply for you in terms of a research project. See how they expand. And then, if you'd like, reach out to a trusted person who might be able to support your efforts. The CNN network, the network has so many wonderful people who are involved in research that you have lots to pick from. You can count me among the people that you might want to reach out to have chats about research or the potential for research in um, your particular part of the world. So I encourage you, in conclusion, to shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. I look forward to following your conscious research journeys. I want to thank you so much for your time and attention.